They say Tennessee hides its ghosts in the hills. The kind of ghosts that don't scream or rattle chains, they whisper. Whispers that slip through the pine trees and settle in your ear when you least expect it. The kind of whispers that sound like a family name. And if you follow them long enough, they lead you somewhere no one should ever go. I didn't believe the stories at first. Families fall apart everywhere. Sickness, war, poverty. But this family, this one didn't just fall apart. It folded inward, turned on itself. And what it became, well, Tennessee's soil is thick enough to bury anything, but not deep enough to keep it hidden forever. The locals called them the Cawthorn family, a name half erased from county records and whispered only by the oldest residents of the valley. Their house, if you can still call it that, stood on the edge of an unmarked dirt road outside Rutledge, a sagging frame of timber, half consumed by kudzu and memory. But it wasn't the house that drew me there. It was the rumor that a sister had borne her brother's child, and that the child had never left those hills. In the early 1900s, Tennessee was a place of isolation. Roads were mud, neighbors were miles apart, and church was the only real law. A family could disappear into itself, and no one would notice until decades later. The Cawthorns lived that way, self-sufficient, secretive, and always just out of reach. Their patriarch, Elias Cawthorn, inherited the land from his father, who'd carved it out of Cherokee territory with axe and blood. By the time Elias took over, the Cawthorn homestead was a kingdom unto itself. Livestock, crops, and 4 surviving children. There was talk that Elias didn't let outsiders visit. Travelers who lost their way on the Old Valley Road would see the light of the Cawthorn lantern and turn back. Not out of fear, at least not at first, but because something about that place didn't feel right. The air felt too still. The dogs didn't bark. And if you stopped and listened, you could swear you heard children crying underground. Elias had 2 sons and 2 daughters. Josiah, born first, then his sister Ada, then the twins, Ruth and Robert. In any other family, they'd have gone to the small church school 2 towns over. But Elias kept them close. Homeschooled, he said. Educated in the true way. No one questioned him. He was a veteran, a landowner, a man of God. Or so they thought. It was Ada who first drew attention, though she never asked for it. By 16, she was strikingly beautiful, with a quiet presence that unsettled people. When the traveling preacher visited that summer, he told the congregation that Ada had the eyes of a saint. Elias forbade him from returning. The stories begin the winter after that sermon. Snow had come early, food was scarce, and no one saw Ada in town again for nearly 2 years. When she reappeared, she was pale, trembling, and carrying an infant that shared her features too perfectly. The county midwife, who'd helped at the birth, didn't live to tell much of what she saw. But before her death, she confided in a neighbor that the father was in the room, and that the father had the same eyes as Ada. Josiah Cawthorn was never seen in public again after that winter. The Cawthorn land became a place people avoided. Farmers who lived nearby said the soil soured. Their animals wouldn't drink from the creek that ran past the Cawthorn property. One man said he saw Ada standing on the porch in the middle of the night, holding her child while a second figure watched from the shadows, tall, familiar, and smiling. When Elias died in 1918, his will was sealed by the county clerk. No one knows why. All that remains is a single entry in the death record: Elias Cawthorn, cause unknown. After his death, Ada and her child vanished from every census. But the story doesn't end there. It just goes quiet. In 1936, the county sent a surveyor to mark property lines for the new highway project. He found the Cawthorn house abandoned, windows shattered, furniture rotting. But in the upstairs bedroom, beneath a pile of rags, he found a child's crib, and in it, a stack of old photographs. Black and white portraits, all showing the same faces repeating generation after generation. The same jawline, the same pale eyes, the same strange symmetry that makes you feel uneasy the longer you look. Each photo was labeled in the same handwriting: Cawthorn blood must stay pure. The surveyor never finished his job. He left the county the following week and never returned. By the 1950s, the old house was a ruin, and the family name was spoken only in whispers. But every so often, hikers or hunters would report seeing someone up there. A thin woman in a white dress, wandering the tree-line, humming a lullaby no one could place. In 1972, 2 boys went missing near the property. Only one was found, 3 days later, dehydrated and delirious. When they asked him what happened, he said a woman with long black hair told him to stay and meet the family. There was no woman, no family, just the house and the sound of something moving in the cellar. If you look up the land records today, the property still exists, still unclaimed. The deed lists the last known owner as Ada Mae Cawthorn, signed in a hand so shaky it looks like the ink itself was afraid to touch the paper. And yet, every few years a new report surfaces. Someone hears crying from the hills. Someone finds footprints too small to belong to any grown man. Someone says they saw the same pale eyes staring at them through the trees. The Cawthorn story became a kind of Appalachian myth, a way to scare children, a ghost tale for late-night firesides. But what if it wasn't a myth? What if it was a record of something real, something too shameful for the county to keep on paper? I spent months digging through courthouse archives, old church registries, even medical reports. Most had been altered or destroyed. But one folder, buried deep in a back room of the Granger County Library, had survived. Inside were letters written in pencil and signed, undated, but unmistakably the same handwriting from the Cawthorn photographs. One line stood out. I've never forgotten it. The child cries for what it does not understand, but the blood remembers. Maybe that's what this story really is, not just a family tragedy, but a warning. Because when you build walls so high around your own bloodline, you stop letting the light in. And what grows in the dark becomes something else entirely. They say the Cawthorn name died with Ada, but I've been to that valley. I've seen the house or what's left of it. And I can tell you one thing with certainty. Someone's still living there. You can hear the past if you know how to listen. It's not the kind of sound that reaches your ears. It's something that sits beneath your ribs, like a memory you never made. That's what it felt like when I walked the Cawthorn land for the first time. A pressure in the chest. A presence that wasn't visible, but alive in the air. The ground itself seemed to breathe. Every step on the old porch sent dust spiraling up from the boards like the house was exhaling for the first time in decades. The front door was half off its hinges, nailed shut and nailed open at the same time. On the frame, carved deep into the wood, were the initials AMC, Ada Mae Cawthorn, and beneath them, a smaller mark, RJC. That second set of initials didn't appear in any record. Not in church documents, not in census data, not in grave sites. Whoever RJC was, they were meant to be hidden. And yet, everywhere I looked inside that house, the same letters were scratched into the walls, scrawled across the mirror, burned into the side of an old cradle. In the living room, a fireplace had collapsed inward, revealing something behind the soot. A small metal cross nailed into the brick. Someone had tried to consecrate this house after the fact. As if holiness could disinfect blood. The deeper I went, the colder it got. I found the cellar door behind the kitchen, under a sheet of rusted tin. The handle was wrapped in wire, a lock improvised from desperation, not security. I pried it loose. The smell that rose up was older than rot. A damp, sour air that carried the faintest trace of decay and something else. Something human. The steps were slick. The air so thick it clung to the lungs. And then, in the darkness below, I saw it. A row of glass jars, neatly arranged on a wooden shelf. Inside each one was a fragment. A child's shoe, a curl of hair, a tooth. Preserved, labeled, counted. Each one marked with a year. 1902, 1905, 1908. And then nothing. Whatever the Cawthorns were preserving, it stopped when Ada disappeared. I took a jar to the surface, careful not to break the seal. The label was nearly illegible, but the ink still glistened faintly in the light. Written in that same trembling script, RJC Secondborn. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to the idea that Ada had more than one child. If RJC was the first, her brother's child, who was the second? And where did that child go? Some stories don't fade with time. They ferment. A week later, I found a newspaper clipping from 1923, buried in a forgotten file drawer at the county museum. It was small, barely a column wide. The headline read, "Infant found in hollow oak. Authorities suspect witchcraft." The location, just outside Rutledge, less than 2 miles from the Cawthorn property. The description of the child matched the same symmetrical features found in the old photos. Pale eyes, ash blonde hair. The coroner's report was brief and deliberately vague. Signs of congenital defect. No evidence of foul play. But in the margin, in handwriting I recognized, someone had added, "The mark repeats. Blood unbroken." When I showed the document to the county historian, she wouldn't touch it. She told me to leave. Her voice trembled when she said it. Not out of anger, but fear. Before I left, she whispered, "You're not supposed to find them." Later that night, I went back to the Cawthorn land one last time. The sun was setting, and the hills were covered in that heavy Tennessee mist that swallows sound. From the treeline, I could see the roof of the old house. It looked different somehow, like it had shifted in its sleep. I called out once. Just a name, Ada. The echo came back late, distorted, like a whisper caught between the trees. And then, I heard something else. A humming. Low, almost tuneless, coming from inside the house. It was the same lullaby the missing boy from 1972 had described. I went inside. The air felt charged, alive, as if the walls themselves were listening. On the mantel, where the old photographs once stood, there was only one remaining. Ada holding a child. But the face of the child had been burned away, the paper blackened and curled. And yet, faintly visible through the burn marks, those same initials. RJC. I didn't see anyone, but I knew I wasn't alone. The boards creaked behind me, soft, deliberate steps. I turned, flashlight trembling, but there was nothing. Only the empty staircase leading up to the second floor. That's when I saw it. Another carving, fresh this time. The letters clean and white against the wood. RJC3. 3 generations. The blood had continued. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you run from it? Or would you dig until you found the truth? The night I left that house, I drove straight to the county line. But curiosity is a kind of infection. You can't just cut it out. I started researching again. Court records, medical archives, death certificates. One report from 1954 stood out. An unidentified woman found wandering near the old Cawthorn Road, barefoot, muttering nonsense. The attending physician noted her unusual resemblance to local historical figures. No name, no fingerprints on record. DNA analysis didn't exist then, but if it had, maybe we would have known who she was. Maybe Ada didn't vanish after all. Maybe she simply became part of the land that kept her secret. A month after that report, the same doctor went missing. His car was found abandoned by the highway, door open, engine still running. The driver's seat was soaked with blood, but the blood type didn't match his. I've spent years trying to piece together what really happened to the Cawthorns. Some nights, I think I've almost solved it. Other nights, I wake up certain I never should have started. Because sometimes the story doesn't end when you tell it. It keeps growing, feeding on the attention, pulling itself forward through time like something alive. And every now and then I get letters. No return address. Just a piece of paper, folded twice, with a single line written in that same familiar script. The child remembers. There's a point when a story stops being history and becomes inheritance. You start to realize that the past doesn't stay where you leave it. It reaches out, tracing its way through bloodlines, through memories, through the places that refuse to forget. That's what I came to understand about the Cawthorns. They weren't just a family. They were a pattern, a wound that kept reopening itself through time. After the last letter arrived, the one that said, "The child remembers," I decided to trace the name forward, not backward. I wanted to see who, if anyone, still carried that blood. What I found didn't make sense at first. There was a small town south of Rutledge, population barely 200. The postmaster there confirmed something strange. Mail still arrived addressed to the Cawthorn name, though no one by that name had been listed as a resident for nearly half a century. The envelopes were always plain, handwritten, postmarked from Knoxville but never collected. After a month, the postmaster burned them, he said, just to keep the peace. When I asked why, he looked away. Because every time we didn't, he said quietly, something happened in this valley. He wouldn't explain what that meant. But he pointed me toward an abandoned trailer park about a mile up the road. The last known address of a woman who'd gone by May. No surname. The trailer was half collapsed, door hanging open, rain pooling inside. But someone had been there recently. The walls were covered in newspaper clippings, all about disappearances, all centered around the same area. In the middle of the floor was a single mirror, and scrawled across it in charcoal, "You can't kill a name." The handwriting was the same as the letters. Among the debris, I found a notebook, water-damaged but readable. The first few pages were biblical verses, copied over and over until the words lost meaning. But the later pages were something else. Descriptions, observations, birth records that weren't official, yet written with disturbing precision. One entry chilled me to the bone. Third born, born strong, male, eyes unbroken, carries the mark in full. Fourth born, silent, female, shows signs of knowing. There were no years, no locations, just those notes and a final line at the bottom of the page. Blood must stay pure until the 5th. I don't know if it was fear or fascination that kept me reading. Each note seemed to mirror the same obsessive belief, the same ideology of purity that had driven Elias Cawthorn a century earlier. It wasn't just inbreeding. It was doctrine, a self-made religion of flesh and memory, rooted in the idea that they were preserving something sacred by never letting the blood mix with the outside world. But here's the thing about isolation. It doesn't protect you. Transforms you. I started looking for May in birth records, in psychiatric files, even in old hospital logs. I found her, sort of. A woman matching her description had been institutionalized in 1981 under the name Ada R. Cawthorn. The middle initial R meant something. A lineage preserved in that single letter. The report described her as lucid but fixated. She claimed her great-grandfather had commanded her to keep the house pure. She also claimed to have children, though none were found. She died in 1989. The attending nurse reported her final words as, "He's still out there, waiting for me to finish it." I didn't know who he was, but the name that appeared in her intake papers offered a clue. Her emergency contact was listed as R. J. Cawthorn Jr. No address, no birth date, no record of his existence anywhere else. And that's when it struck me. What if the bloodline didn't end with Ada? What if it kept looping back, each generation birthing another with the same name, the same face, the same devotion to a curse disguised as faith? When I went back to the valley one last time, it was late autumn. The trees had shed their leaves, and the land felt stripped bare, like bone. I walked to the spot where the house once stood. The foundation was still there, half swallowed by earth. And in the middle of it, a tree had grown, tall, pale, and twisted. The bark looked almost human, smooth in some places, ridged like knuckles in others. At its base, something caught the light. A small metal cross, the same kind once nailed into the fireplace. But this one had been bent backward, like it had tried to pull itself out of the soil. That's when I heard it again, the humming. Faint, drifting between the branches. The same tune. The lullaby. I froze. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. I'd heard it before. Not just on tape, not just in the accounts, but in my own dreams. A melody that had followed me for months. One I'd never been able to explain. I turned and saw a figure at the tree line. Small. Motionless. Watching. For a second, I thought it was a trick of the light. But then I saw the eyes. Pale. Reflective. Familiar. I called out. The figure didn't move. Then, slowly, it turned and walked into the woods. I followed. The ground was soft with moss and memory. every step muffled by the weight of the story pressing down on me. I lost sight of the figure, but I could still hear the humming closer now, circling me. When the sound stopped, I realized where I was standing. An unmarked graveyard, ringed by broken stones. Each one carved with the same initials, RJC. Some old, some new. I counted 13. I don't remember leaving the valley. I don't remember driving home. I only remember waking up 2 days later with mud on my shoes and a piece of paper in my coat pocket. It said, "The 5th is born." That was 6 months ago. Since then, small things have started happening. Photographs in my office fall from the wall at night. My reflection seems to lag a second behind. And every so often, when I pass by a mirror, I swear I see someone else's eyes staring back. Sometimes I think about those words carved into the house, into the trees, into the bones of Tennessee itself. The blood must stay pure. But purity, I've learned, is just another word for rot. The Cawthorn story isn't finished. It was never meant to end. Because what began in isolation has now spread in silence, carried not by names, but by inheritance. By those who listen too closely, by those who can't stop looking. And maybe that's the real curse. Not the house, not the family, but the attention. The more you know, the closer you are to it. So if you've watched this far, you've already let the story in. And once it's in, it doesn't leave. Because blood remembers. And now, so do you.